I think that there are concerns with the team, but they are not concerns that surprise me. If we I can't say enough to go back and listen to what we said, and I know we didn't do a lot in the summer, but when we talked in the summer, when we did, we said these things. We said we tried to warn people. You know what? This reeks of a step back year because of last year was so, and there goes the banner again. Last year was so unexpected as far as the outcomes, right? But outcomes are not always what you're looking for in a rebuild. You can't just look at outcomes in a rebuild. You have to look at each individual player's progress and growth within that. Whether the team's winning or losing, you can have guys who are going really well and the team's losing a lot of games just as easily as you can have guys kind of going the other way and you're winning games, right? So the outcome is not what you look at. And unfortunately, we all, including you, Russell, get caught up in outcomes being the determinant of what a rebuild looks like and is.
Right. What does that mean, the
outcomes of games? Yeah. In other words, you like to base what a rebuild is off of the game's outcomes.
I like to base it off of when you get to the draft, are you able to make the moves that you want to be able to make? It's Jetlachenko looks like a good player.
Okay.
He looks like a good player.
And they traded down to get him.
He looks like a good player. Would I have much rather see them to be in a position where they finish with the 7th worst record and can trade up to go after like a demigod?
Did anybody trade down out of those top spots?
No.
Why do you think that is?
Except the Flyers had.
Why do you think that is?
Because no one offered an attractive enough package to move up.
And so why do you think if the Flyers were at, say, 7,
because
they suddenly could have...
Well, they have 3 first-round picks this year, right?
Now they do.
They had two going in.
Yeah. And one of them was at the very back end of the first round.
I just looked at it as you could have been in position to go and get a guy.
You could have. But there was no guarantee to that.
Except the thing is that when you put yourself in purgatory, you hurt your chances of moving up in the lottery.
Who says that you're in purgatory?
Jetlachenko might be a good player. We don't know.
But who says you're in purgatory?
When you just barely miss the playoffs.
No, if you
are
do it
in hockey purgatory.
If you do it repeatedly.
No, even in the case of 1 year, when you set the expectations as this is a rebuild.
Are the Devils in purgatory?
I don't think the Devils are a particularly great team.
Are you out of your mind?
I don't think they're a great team.
They're going to win.
I think they have
a
some
real
really,
chance
they have
to
some
win
really
this division
good
this
players.
Year. It's either them or the Rangers.
But remind me, how did they get their best player?
They were bad, but then. But wait a second,
they were
Russell.
bad. They were bad, or they were purgatory.
Last year they just missed the playoffs. So you don't want to be in hockey.
They already have their elite.
Now you have a chance
how many players
again.
do they have that you would consider to be elite or elite adjacent?
One
or very good.
One
all-star caliber players. How many do the Flyers have?
One.
They have one.
Maybe two.
That they lucked into because he wouldn't take a meeting with Phoenix. And because there was a geopolitical situation,
it's so much easier to look back and have the clairvoyance of the past. It's so much easier to be negative 95% of the time.
I would rather, if you're rebuilding, be in a higher position to get the player you want up high in the draft. Because you have a better chance of hitting in the top 5 than you do at like number 13.
Sure you do.
Bill, am I crazy?
No, drafting top 5, it statistically gives you a better chance. However, the teams that tend to eventually contend, and those are teams that drafted well later in the first round, found some players later in the draft, right? Look at what the Florida Panthers did, finding a Carter Verhaeghe, who's you bring in as a free agent. And it was kind of a cast-off, and all of a sudden he's a scorer for you.
He's a star.
He's a star. So that's really what it takes. And when there is not just one way of doing it, Russ. That's the thing. You look at all those years where Boston was the top team. What was their core, right? Well, their core was
all guys drafted low.
Correct.
All
Pasternak late first round, Bergeron second round, Marchand third round. right? And that was their core.
Yeah.
And no, you can't bank on you're going to find those kind of players.
That's the thing. Like that's the thing that does set apart a team that goes from good to great.
Yeah.
Could be an elite team, scouting, front office. You find those
and a bit of luck.
You find those guys and you execute. Like I don't disagree with that at all. There aren't a lot of teams that are able to find those guys in the earlier rounds, but like aren't getting them in that top spot. I just look at it back to like I think a GM gets 3 to 5 years, right? I think if you're a well-liked GM, you have a good relationship with the ownership, you get 3 to 5 years. And in the first year of a rebuild, it's a perfect time to potentially go and get yourself one of those high picks. That was it. Like that's been the whole crux of it. And I think that if that had happened, I would have felt better potentially with the guy top 5 in this past draft. And then you look ahead to next year and you say that like whatever happens this year, we now think that if it's Demidov and Michkov, all right, we have our 2 guys. We have our 2 guys that we want to develop into, call it sacrilege, into what could be your Crosby and your Malkin, your two-headed. I'm saying your two-headed monster. Your 2 guys that you build the whole thing around.
I think you touched on something that the Flyers and every team that's building needs is you need that center to build around. That
Sure.
top of the lineup center. The Penguins had 2 of them.
Yeah.
Right. And while it's great to draft a winger who could be a superstar, really, that old thing about building down the middle, it still works.
Well, I do want to throw this to you though. Demidov, we've talked about this on the show. Demidov has actually been quoted as saying he thinks that Michkov could be a center. Have you seen anything to his game that gives you the indication that Michkov maybe actually could be that franchise center?
Yeah, well, he played a little bit of center in the preseason, the KHL last year. Actually spent most of the preseason at center. Certainly is a playmaking forward. He has all the playmaking skills. He sees the ice the way a center would. So I think he could do it from an offensive standpoint. I don't know that he could handle the defensive side of being a center. And those are pretty heavy defensive responsibilities. That's what my concern would be.
I wouldn't expect him to do it this year. Do you think that in another year or two, getting his legs under him, that might be a time that they
might experiment.
That they experiment with
might
it?
experiment.
Yeah.